Well, Canada-U.S. relations are in the midst of a major shift right now, with a potential revision in NAFTA looming and a major push by Ottawa and Canadian companies to bring talent back home. For a little bit more perspective on this and some other big stories that we're watching these days, we're joined by Robert Herjavec, the Chief Executive Officer of Herjavec Group, known, of course, to Shark Tank fans as one of the Sharks as well. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
A nice one, though.
Most days. Well, it's me or Kevin, so the bar isn't very high.
You know, we've been talking a lot this morning about the latest from Donald Trump in Washington. Certainly, Canadian officials are trying to figure out what this all means for trade. As someone who built their business here at home, and we're trying to sort of get a sense on where things go from here. What's been your take on sort of the political landscape and what it means for Canada in this North American situation?
Yeah, you know, first of all, as a Canadian company, we built our company in Canada. It's undeniable that if you want to build a large company, inevitably you have to go outside of Canada. We did no business outside of Canada until 3 years ago, but the population of Canada is less than the state of California. It's a big market. So the way to export your business is you have to actually show up and you have to go there. Today, the U.S. is more divided than I've ever seen it. The entire administration, I mean, people either love Trump or they hate Trump. There's no middle ground. I think it's a great time for Canada to attract talent. You have to think local, but we have to work with a lot of global companies, and we're good at that. People like Canadians. You know, when we expanded to the States, we said, where else do people like Canadians? And so we expanded to the UK also.
So it seems like, you know, there are certainly lots of divides, and within, you know, the lumber sector or the dairy sector, there are difference of opinions between Canadian producers and U.S. But tech, Canada and the U.S. seem to actually get along very well and seem to have a really tight relationship, especially because they use us as a source of talent. What's underpinning that, and what does that ultimately mean for Canada? As to your point, you say we're kind of trying to do this drive of attracting talent to Canada for a sector that seems to have the hot hand right now.
Well, first of all, a 35% exchange rate is very attractive to Canadians. I mean, let's be honest about that. When our dollar is this low, Canadians are always going to want to work in the States in the high-tech sector. The funny thing is the pay rates are about the same. What I have to pay for an engineer, let's say it's $150,000, I pay that either $150,000 US or I pay $150,000 Canadian. So it's attractive for Canadians to go. I actually think what's happening right now is going to be really good for Canada because of the B1 visas. The U.S. is going to make it harder and harder for foreign engineering talent to enter the U.S., and people are going to come to Canada.
Are you seeing that within your business?
Yeah, we are very much. And I think, again, Canada is going to become a haven for global engineering talent, and I think this is going to be very good for us. If we didn't have snow, we would be the perfect country.
Well, you know, the other thing, I mean, I think one of the things we've seen with the Liberal government as well is they want to get more talent here. They also want to make sure that any of the great talent that we're creating at home doesn't go or get swallowed up by a U.S. company. So whether that's, you know, doing a better job at schools like U of T, of taking the talent that's thinking up really cool stuff and allowing them to turn that into a real business, the same way that Stanford seems to have done a pretty good job of that in Silicon Valley. Can that work?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's not just U of T. It's Laurier has a great program, and Waterloo has a great program, and University of Ottawa has a great. Entrepreneurism is very cool, and Americans love business. There's something in the DNA of Americans that love business, but I think we're seeing the same thing in Canada. The capital gains tax in Canada is much better than it is in the U.S. If you're going to start a business, build a business, sell a business, it's better to do it in Canada. But you have to expand globally. I mean, when we started our business, we got to 100 million in sales, and we thought, oh my gosh, we're the biggest company in Canada. And that was the problem. We were the biggest company in Canada. Today, we're 200 million, and we're this big on a global scale. You can start in Canada, you can expand globally, and build a great business here.
You need the money to do that. You need funding. And some say that there is a change taking place and you are getting a lot more scale-up capital for some of these Canadian startups to go from a $100 million business to $500 million. But would you say that that's still pretty scarce and one of our weaknesses?
No, people love to complain about that, but there are great companies here like Shopify that have no problem raising capital. Outside equity will come into Canada and buy great companies and invest in them. Look at Canada Goose.
You have to be perfect. You have to be perfect like Shopify, where you could argue in the U.S., I mean, a Snapchat, for example, is that a perfect company? It's losing lots of money.
500 million users a day is a pretty perfect company.
But see,
you have to be perfect, but you have to be perfect in the world of business. In order to execute, you have to have a certain level of perceived perfection. So is it harder here?
Just a higher standard of perfection that you don't really need in the U.S. because there's a lot more willingness to throw money around.
I don't know if I agree with that. Yeah, but there's a higher level of competition.
Okay.
For every Snap, there are many, many other ones. You know, on the flip side, you could argue that a company like Shopify would have had a harder time in the U.S. I think it's a great time to start a business, and I think it's a great time to be in tech. And I think it's a great time to be Canadian, and we should be very proud of that. We can compete on a global scale. We should never feel like we're not good enough. You know, before we went to the US, we kind of thought, like you just said, oh, we're not perfect, we're not great. Can we really compete? Absolutely, Canada can compete on a global scale.